A Navy SEAL found his missing K9 locked in a Slaughterhouse van. Then the town turned against him. 11 days. Titan had been gone 11 days when Logan Holt cut the padlock on the gate of the Vance livestock processing facility at 2:47 in the morning and walked into the compound alone. He'd driven every road in Sublette County twice. He'd called the shelter, the vet clinics, the county animal control office, the neighboring ranches. He'd posted on every local Facebook group and stapled paper flyers to every telephone pole between Granville and the highway. 11 days. And then, a ranch hand named Decker, who'd done a summer shift at Vance's, told Logan something over a beer at the Horseshoe Bar that changed everything. They run dogs through there. Not always the right kind of dogs. Logan had driven to the Vance facility the next morning and watched the parking lot. At 11:40, he'd seen the van. White. No markings, and through the ventilation slats on the side panel, he'd seen a shape. Black and gold, pressed flat against the metal floor. Not moving the way a dog moves when it still has hope. Moving the way a dog moves when it has run out of it. He went in that night. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. We read every single comment, and this story, what one man does when a whole town turns its back on him, is something we believe you need to hear all the way through. Master Chief Petty Officer Logan Holt, retired, was 42 years old and had been living on 5 acres outside Granville, Wyoming, for 8 months, long enough to know which gas station had the better coffee, and short enough that most people still said the new fella when they meant him. He was 6 feet, 185, with the kind of build that military service maintains and civilian life slowly renegotiates. His hair was dark and cut close. A pale scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his jaw, a blade in Mosul in 2018, the same operation that had taken the cartilage from his left knee and ended his career. His eyes were a particular shade of dark gray that people tended to notice and then find difficult to describe. Not cold, not warm, simply present in a way that most people's eyes are not. He had learned, over 19 years of service, and 2 years since, to hold still in the way that still men hold still, completely, without effort, without announcing it. He was not a man who made enemies easily. He was not, in the ordinary run of things, a man who made noise. He had bought the 5 acres because it was quiet, and because the mountains were visible from the kitchen window, and because he'd needed. After Mosul, and the deployment before Mosul, and the one before that, to be somewhere that didn't ask anything of him for a while. He had done 3 deployments with Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Kandahar in 2012, Syria in 2016, and Mosul in 2018, wherein Eid took the cartilage from his left knee and 2 members of his team and left him with a Purple Heart and a medical discharge that he'd been carrying like a weight that hadn't yet decided where it wanted to settle. He'd come home to a house he'd rented in Virginia for 6 months, and then sold. He'd bought the Wyoming property because no one he knew was there, which had seemed at the time like the only requirement he was capable of articulating. He had Titan, and that was what had made the silence livable. Titan was a 7-year-old German shepherd with a coat that ran from deep black along his spine and ears to a rich gold at his chest and paws, and he weighed 86 pounds, every ounce of it operational muscle and the particular canine awareness that takes 2 years to build and a lifetime to calibrate. A scar crossed his muzzle from the left side, a thin raised line from the vehicle eyed in Kandahar in 2013 that had put his handler in hospital for 6 weeks and had left Titan standing in the smoke, ready to work, waiting for the next command. That was who Titan was. He had been through the kind of thing that breaks most creatures, and he had come through it with his nature intact. He moved with the clean, controlled patience of a dog that had learned the difference between threat and noise and had stopped wasting himself on the latter. He slept at the foot of Logan's bed. He sat in the passenger seat when Logan drove. He'd been the first thing Logan thought of in the morning for 2 years. 11 days ago, Titan had been in the yard at 6 in the evening. By 6:30, he was gone. The Vance livestock processing facility had been operating outside Granville for 61 years, 3 generations of Vances. The current Richard Vance running it since his father's retirement 14 years ago. It employed 140 people in a town of 2,400, which was not a small thing in a county where the economy ran on livestock and not much else. Richard Vance's family name was on the side of the facility, on a scholarship at the high school, and on the sign above the door of the First Community Bank of Granville, where his cousin sat on the board of directors. He owned the feed store on Main Street. He held the mortgage on 43 of the properties in Granville's commercial district. He had a standing Wednesday lunch with the county commission chair, whose name was Dale, and Dale had been at that lunch every week for 11 years, without exception. Richard Vance was 58 years old and had never been told no by anyone in Sublette County who wanted to keep their job or their loan or their standing in the community. He had a wide face and the particular ease of a man who has learned that power does not need to announce itself. It simply needs to be present, to be felt, to be understood. He spoke at high school graduations and cut ribbons and made donations to the volunteer fire department every Christmas for 22 years, and the fire chief kept the most recent check framed above his desk, not as loyalty, but as arithmetic. 140 jobs in a town of 2,400. The math was not complicated. The math was the reason people looked away. His family name was on the gymnasium at Granville High School, and on the scholarship fund at the community college, and above the door of the First Community Bank, where his cousin held the board position. He owned the feed store on Main Street. He held the paper on 43 commercial properties. He had a standing Wednesday lunch with the county commission chair, a man named Dale, who had been eating that lunch for 11 years and who had no intention of stopping, because stopping would require an explanation that Dale did not have a comfortable answer for. He had received 3 prior complaints about his side operation in 6 years. All 3 had been routed through the county animal welfare office. All 3 had been filed and held, and eventually closed. The people who filed them had left Granville within 18 months, not because anyone threatened them, but because Granville has a specific way of becoming small around a person who has made the wrong enemy, and small enough for long enough is its own kind of pressure. He ran the side operation through the facility because no one who could stop him had any reason to look. And everyone who had reason to look had no power to stop him. That was the arrangement. It had been the arrangement for 6 years. He had filed the police report the morning after Logan broke into the compound. Trespassing, property damage, conducted in a manner that endangered facility operations. The report had been taken by Deputy Harlan Cross, who was Vance's cousin by marriage. And Cross had processed it with the particular efficiency of a man doing a favor that would be remembered. He'd issued Logan a citation and told him, with professional courtesy and complete firmness, that if he set foot on Vance property again, he would be arrested. The Granville Courier had run the story 48 hours later. Former military man breaks into local family business. Logan had read it at the gas station, standing beside the pump. Someone had printed it out and taped it to the counter at the coffee window. The woman behind the counter, who had been calling him Hahn for 8 months, did not make eye contact. That was how it started. That was the week the town turned. He understood it, without approving of it. He had been in places where the social structure closed around a threat, the way a muscle closes around a wound, instinctively and completely. And he understood that the closing was not cruelty. It was survival. Granville needed Vance the way a body needs a bone that is also slightly wrong. And the people of Granville had made their peace with that arrangement the way people make peace with arrangements that have become load-bearing. He was new. He was the disruption. They chose the structure. At the diner on Thursday, a man he'd done fence work with in September looked through him. At the gas station on Friday, 2 women he recognized from the 4th of July moved to another pump. On Saturday, someone spray-painted 3 words on his mailbox post that he photographed for the record and did not otherwise engage with. Deputy Cross drove past his property twice on Sunday morning and did not stop. Inside the Horseshoe Bar, where he'd been a regular for 7 months, the bartender, who had always remembered his order now, seemed to have forgotten. The man 3 stools down who'd told him about the ranch hand Decker, who'd given him the tip that started all of this, avoided his eyes now. Word had gotten back. Word always got back in a town of 2,400. He understood what was happening. A community that has organized itself around one man's power cannot afford to believe that man is wrong. To believe Vance was wrong was to believe that all the years of lunches with Dale and framed checks at the fire station and scholarship funds at the college were not goodwill, but transactions. It was easier to believe the new man was the problem. Logan had seen this before, not in Wyoming, but in places where loyalty and livelihood were the same word, and where the person who named the truth first paid the first price for it. He did not stop going to town. He did not change his route or his habits. He filled his truck at the same gas station and ordered his coffee at the same window and nodded at the people who looked away. It was not stubbornness. It was the specific discipline of a man who understands that leaving is what the pressure is designed to produce, and that he would not be producing it. Logan had called 3 people in those 11 days. A Navy JAG officer in Coronado named Lieutenant Commander Reyes, who had done operational legal support for the SEAL teams and who had owed Logan a favor since Kandahar. A state-level animal welfare investigator in Cheyenne named Susan Park, who had taken his statement over the phone and asked 3 specific questions that told him she already knew what Vance was running. And a USTA inspector named Garrett, who had said 3 words before Logan finished his first sentence: "We know Vance." None of these calls had produced anything yet. The machinery was moving. Logan understood that machinery moved slowly. Meanwhile, the restraining order arrived on Monday. Vance's attorney had filed for a civil restraining order, 500 feet from the facility employees, and Richard Vance personally. A judge had signed it that same day, which was the kind of speed that became possible when a man had a cousin on the county commission and 20 years of community goodwill. Deputy Cross served it himself, with a small, controlled smile that he kept professional. Logan took the paper. He read it. He handed it back. "Keep it," Cross said. "You need to know its terms." "I know its terms," Logan said. He went inside. He sat at the kitchen table. The silence in the house was the kind of silence that 5 acres of Wyoming can produce in October, complete and cold at the edges, and entirely without comfort. He put both hands flat on the table. He looked at the mountains through the window. He did not break anything. He did not make another call. He thought about Titan, not abstractly, but specifically, the warmth of him against the foot of the bed at night, the particular sound of him moving through the yard in the morning, the way he'd look back over his shoulder on walks, checking, always checking, because that was his nature, and his nature had not left him even after Kandahar. He thought about the 3 calls he'd made. Reyes, who had said the machinery was moving but slowly. Park, who had said she needed documentation she didn't yet have. Garrett, who had said they knew Vance, and then said nothing useful for 10 days. The machinery moved slowly, because it was designed to move slowly. Because the people it processed through were accustomed to the pace, and the people it was supposed to stop were accustomed to using the pace as cover. He had been in situations before where the right answer was to wait and trust the process. He had also been in situations where the process was the problem. In this county, in this town, the process was Harlan Cross and Dale and the board of the First Community Bank, and the process had just served him a restraining order while Titan was in a van. He had one thing left. He had been the kind of man, for 19 years, who had learned that the moment you have one thing left is not the moment to mourn the things you no longer have. It is the moment to understand what that one thing actually is and use it with everything you've got. He sat at the table for 40 minutes. Then he got up and made coffee and waited for something true to find its way to his door. He didn't know yet that it was already on its way. He would know it in a few hours. The knock came at 5 minutes to 11. He opened the door to find Maria Espejo, 29 years old, a line supervisor at Vance Processing for the past 4 years, a woman he'd seen exactly twice before, at the gas station and at the school pickup line where her daughter, who was 7, had a red coat. She was standing on his porch in the October cold with her hands in her jacket pockets and an expression on her face that people wear when they have decided to do something that frightens them and have decided to do it anyway because they cannot find a reason not to. That is larger than the one they've found to do it. She had a phone in her left hand. "I'm sorry it took this long," she said. The video was 93 seconds long. She'd shot it through the slats of the van 2 weeks ago, when she'd been doing late inventory in the lot and had heard something, and had followed the sound without thinking, and had filmed what she found before she understood what she was doing. Military working dog collar, still on Titan, the tag readable if you froze the frame. The van. The dog, and in the final 11 seconds, a man loading 3 additional dogs into the vehicle who was not Richard Vance, who was a man Maria recognized as Vance's operations manager, Derek Stills, who had been running this part of the business for 6 years, and who Maria had been afraid to name for 6 years because her daughter had a red coat and a school pickup, and Maria was the only thing standing between her and a much smaller life. "I should have come sooner," she said. "You came," Logan said. He called Reyes in Coronado at 11:15. He texted the video to Susan Park in Cheyenne at 11:18. He forwarded the freeze frame of the tag to Garrett at the USTA at 11:20. He did all 3 with the particular efficiency of a man who has spent 20 years learning that the moment information becomes evidence is the moment you stop hesitating and start moving. They came the following morning at 7:45, not Deputy Cross's county car, but a state animal welfare vehicle, a USTA inspection truck, and an unmarked sedan that contained Lieutenant Commander Reyes and a civilian JAG attorney whose specialty was military working dog welfare, and whose presence meant that the federal government had been waiting for exactly the documentation that Logan had now provided. They came to the Vance processing facility because that was where the evidence was, and that was where the resolution needed to happen. Richard Vance was in the facility lot when they pulled through the gate, speaking to his morning supervisor. He saw the vehicles and he understood immediately what they were, not their exact purpose, but their category. The category was consequence. He had not encountered the category before. Logan got out of his truck. Titan was not with him yet. Titan was somewhere on the other side of the gate. He walked toward Vance across the gravel lot in the October morning, with the particular movement of a man who has run out of patience and is very careful about it, and behind him Maria Espejo walked through the gate and stood still, invisible beside him. And several of Vance's workers, people who had been watching from the facility entrance since the vehicles arrived, saw her standing there, and something shifted in the lot that was not the wind. There were 40 or 50 of Vance's people out there, drawn by the vehicles, drawn by the morning, drawn by whatever instinct pulls workers out of a building when something real is happening in the lot. They stood in clusters. Some of them knew Maria Espejo. Most of them did. She had worked there for years. She had eaten lunch in the same break room, and pulled the same shifts, and known the same names. They looked at her standing beside a man they'd been told was a trespasser and a problem. And the look on her face was not the look of someone who had been taken there against her will. Vance looked at Logan, then at the vehicles, then at the woman standing beside him. Something moved in his face, the specific movement of a man encountering the end of an arrangement he had believed was permanent. "You have no right. 7 years of federal procurement fraud on military working dog relocation funds," Logan said. His voice was the voice he used when he wanted a room to understand that the conversation was over. Not loud, not heated. Simply final. 8 dogs identified and detained in violation of the Animal Welfare Act. One of them carrying active military working dog identification, which creates a specific set of federal charges that your county commission chair is not going to be able to help you with. He held Richard Vance's gaze and did not look away. "I can give you the opportunity to cooperate," Logan continued, "or I can let the USTA and the JAG office and the state animal welfare investigator conduct the search without your cooperation, which will take longer and produce the same result with additional charges attached." He gave it 2 seconds. "Those are your options." Vance looked at his workers. He looked at Maria. He looked at the man standing across from him who had not raised his voice once, and who had no expression on his face that suggested he was interested in anything Vance might say next. He tried one more time. "You can't do this," Vance said. The words came out hollow, the way entitled words come out when they have lost their backing. Logan's silence was the only response needed. Inside the facility, one of Vance's workers, a man who had been there 14 years and whose daughter had been born the month Richard Vance's father retired, turned to the man beside him and said something quietly. The man beside him nodded. They walked back inside the facility together. Not away from Logan, just done with Vance. The search of the facility took 4 hours. Titan was found in the van, alive, dehydrated, underweight by 11 pounds, his military working dog collar intact, the tag readable. Susan Park photographed the collar with the specificity of a professional building a case, and then she handed Titan's leash to Logan without ceremony and simply said, "He's yours." Titan pressed himself against Logan's leg. He didn't make a sound. He held still the way he'd been trained to hold still, completely, and with the knowledge that this was where he was supposed to be. 8 additional dogs were found and removed. Derek Stills was cited by state animal welfare that morning and arrested on federal charges the following week. Richard Vance's facility permits were suspended pending investigation. The suspension became permanent in February. The side operation had been running for 6 years, had received 3 prior complaints, and had never once been investigated because the county structures that received those complaints were the same county structures that Richard Vance maintained. Logan's trespassing citation was dropped. The restraining order was vacated. The Granville Courier ran a second story, this one with Susan Park's photograph of Titan's collar as the top image. The woman behind the coffee window at the gas station called Logan Hahn again 2 weeks later. And he let her, because that was who he was. Maria Espejo did not lose her job. She had resigned before the investigation concluded, and she had received 3 calls about new employment within a week of the Courrier's second story. The third call was from the State Animal Welfare Office in Cheyenne, where Susan Park had put in a word. 3 months later, on a cold Saturday in January, the Granville Animal Welfare Volunteer Organization held a small ceremony in the parking lot of the library, the only public building in town that didn't have a Vance nameplate somewhere on its exterior. 8 of the recovered dogs had been adopted by Granville families. Titan was not available for adoption. Titan was already home. Maria's daughter, whose name was Lucia, and who had the red coat and the specific, uncomplicated confidence of a 7-year-old who has decided she knows how things work, walked across the parking lot to where Logan was standing with Titan and asked if she could pet him. Logan looked at the dog. Titan looked at Lucia. And then Titan's tail began to move, one slow arc, then another, the deliberate wag of an animal that has been through enough to know when something is good. Lucia threw her arms around the dog's neck. Titan held still and let her. Sometimes God doesn't send justice with a trumpet and a banner. Sometimes he sends it quietly, in the dark of 11 days, in a 93-second video shot by a woman who was afraid and did it anyway. Sometimes the hardest part of courage is not the breaking down of doors. It is the standing still in a town that has decided you are the problem, and not moving, and trusting that something true will eventually be heavier than something powerful. The world is full of men like Richard Vance, men who have been told yes for so long that they have forgotten it was ever someone's choice to say it. The world is also full of people like Maria Espejo, who say no in the dark when it costs them almost everything, because they cannot find a reason to keep quiet that outweighs the one they've found to speak. And somewhere in between them, standing alone on 5 acres in October, with a restraining order in his pocket, and a whole town looking the other way, there is a man who simply refuses to stop. God does not always give us allies before he gives us the battle. Sometimes he gives us the battle first, to show us what we're made of. And the allies come in through the back gate at 11 at night, with a phone in their hand and something true on the screen. If Logan's story moved you, if it reminded you that one person standing still can change what a whole room decides to do, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever seen a community close ranks around the wrong thing? We'd like to hear your story. If you believe that truth finds its way even through the hardest winters, please subscribe to the channel. We tell these stories because they need to be told. May God bless you, protect your family, and grant you the courage to stand still when the world is telling you to walk away.